All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start. And so my presentation is obviously on effective affective education for the gifted learner. And mostly I'm focusing on the social and emotional needs, but it sounds better to say affective, with effective, so we went with that. But so we're looking at the social and emotional needs of gifted. And I will say that we recognize gifted in the state of Georgia as academically gifted, but we do have students who may not be academically gifted, but they may be athletically or musically gifted. And so these things will still apply, or they might be gifted in one subject over another, even though they may not be qualified as gifted in the state of Georgia. They still may fall in this gifted area. So when you have students who, for example, with music or with sports that are showing those signs of giftedness, there are some things that you can do to support their social and emotional needs. I'm going to read the next two slides because it's specifically from the National Association for Gifted Children. They recognize 5 areas that gifted students need to be served in. And so I'm going to read this one word for word. I'm not going to read all the slides word for word, but these two I am, because I feel like they're really important and they lay that foundation for why this is so important. It says, gifted students need support and guidance to develop socially and emotionally, as well as in their area of talent. Socio-emotional development may lag intellectual development. It is crucial that gifted education professionals and parents of students with gifts and talents promote well-rounded development and the pursuit of self-actualization. Qualities such as emotion regulation, social skills, willingness to take strategic risks, ability to cope with challenges and handle criticism, confidence, self-perceptions, and motivation should be developed, as they may differentiate those individuals who move to increasingly higher levels of talent development from those who do not. So for the NAGC, and the 5 things that they recognize that students need and must have and that they deserve from us, this is one of the 5 that they say, hey, we got to hit the social emotional, because if we don't, they cannot develop in the way that they should develop in their programs. And so studies actually show that it's not that gifted kids have a different level of adjustment than their normal age peers. A lot of times they're going to experience a lot of the same things. Maybe they experience perfectionism the same, or maybe they don't experience it at all, whatever. It's not that they experience it differently. However, because of their unique traits, their experiences, and their academic situations, if they suffer from some of these situations, it becomes more magnified for them. So that's the reason why we have to really hit those things. It's not that if you're sitting in a room of kids, you may not be able to even notice that that child is any different, and they may not be. They may be way more well-adjusted than their peers who are not gifted. But when they're not, they feel it greatly. Or they can feel it greatly. And so a lot of times because of those character traits, they're reacting to challenges in a way that's just different than their peers, okay? This is a non-exhaustive list of possible character traits. So I'm gonna put a list up here, and it's gonna look like, oh my goodness, I just put a bunch of side effects of some new medication out there. But it's not, and not every child suffers from, some of them suffer from none of these. Some suffer from many. So take a second and peruse those. And I'm curious what ones are super obvious to you and what ones are shocking to you. So if you'll look at them for a second, and if there's any that you see frequently or that you've not seen or whatever. So first, with giftedness, whether it's academic, music, sports, are there any of these that just yes, I've seen that frequently?
I've seen perfectionism a lot. Remember Emily?
Social difficulties.
Yes. Yes.
Anxiety.
I'm so gifted, I don't get along with people.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Are there any shockers to you?
I feel like isolation.
Okay.
So they're just in their head and
They actually pull back from others, and because I'm videoed, I won't name any specific names.
Sure.
But there are some of those kids who actually they self-isolate and they don't want to put themselves out there. So if you were to walk into my class with my gifted children, you're going to see it. You're going to see the super social butterfly who actually you may not realize is actually struggling right now with one of my most social is actually struggling with maybe some academic insecurity in some content. But then, and then you've got the other one who has self-isolated, but, is excelling in the current academic material. So it's going to be this whole range of stuff.
Procrastination.
So as a shocker, or
yeah, well,
or
Once
as
again, I'm very gifted in that.
yes. So, and I'm not going to read all these, but these are just some things to be aware of that sometimes they're not. That it's something they have to learn to adjust to, and just to be aware of. So, a lot of gifted students are not going to ask for help because they feel like they have to meet a certain standard. They feel like it is their responsibility. Like if they're academically smart or musically smart or athletically gifted, they feel like it's their responsibility to measure up to here. And if they don't, they can't ask for help. And so that's something they struggle with. And a lot of times those standards are self-imposed. It's not sometimes that a parent is putting that on them or a teacher. It's self-imposed, and it's not something that you can look at them and say, it's fine, don't worry about it. We have to look beyond that because they can't not worry about it. They have to develop some skills to be able to deal with that. And in a perfect world, we could have small groups where they could work through this, but even then, it's not always going to be effective because what you're struggling with may not be what the next student's struggling with. And so it's something that you just kind of have to recognize and kind of deal with when you see it. So what can we do to support their social and emotional needs? And that's what we're going to look at. And some of the things are just really simple that you may not realize that you may already be doing. So the first thing is understand that not all the traits are negative. So for example, we talked about perfectionism. There is adaptive versus maladaptive. So for example, if I say, I need to be the best at this, but being the best at this does not affect me adversely, that's fine. That type of perfectionism is actually totally fine, and it's not something to discourage. So I want to work hard. A kid takes a test. They make a 90, and they say, I want to reassess. We shouldn't look at them and say, it's fine, you did great. If they want to reassess because they have a standard that they want to meet, great. But if their perfectionism is inhibiting them from doing work, that would be maladaptive, when it is causing them anxiety, stress, and or they're doing a project and they just cannot complete it because it has to be perfect. That's going to become maladaptive, and that's when we want to look at it. So perfectionism in and of itself is not necessarily a negative trait, and you're going to see that in kids that are not gifted as well. And it's a case-by-case situation. When you see it's becoming an issue, that's when you would want to intervene or support them or whatever. And divergent interests. Unique connections are not necessarily bad connections. Gifted children, a lot of times, will relate better to kids that are older than them or even significantly younger than them. A lot of times you'll see a gifted kid and they bond with someone that might be years younger than them, and it's because that younger kid has no inhibitions with certain things, and so they have that bond with them. Or they gravitate towards adults or towards older children because they do not match their peers. There's this asynchronous development, and they're not matching their peers, and so they gravitate towards these other kids. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay, as long as it's a healthy, relationship, obviously. Sensitivity. So they might be overly sensitive, and that's not always a negative thing because a lot of times there's a lot more emotional depth. So maybe they're super sensitive, they're emotional about things. However, they're able to connect to kids, or they're able to see things or feel things. So it's not always bad. Isolation, we talked about that a minute ago. So with isolation, they might be off on their own, but those kids actually sometimes are super self-aware, and they're able to self-advocate if needed, as long as you might have to sit with them for them to self-advocate. But a lot of times, they're very aware of their needs. They're very aware of their strengths, their weaknesses, because their isolation makes them aware. So obviously there's things we look at, but it's not always a bad thing. And then underachievement. So sometimes the underachievement, yes, it might be bad, but sometimes we have to look at, they may be underachieving because they're not being challenged. And if you're not being challenged, then you're going to be bored. And so, with sports, if I ask you, hey, you're going to come in today, we're going to work on basketball, and you come in and all I have you do is dribble a ball, obviously you're going to be bored. Or if all I have you do is, I'm not a music person, but, here, sing this little, Mary Had a Little Lamb, or play this, you're going to be bored with that. So if I don't offer you that challenge, then at some point there does become underachievement. So even though that we don't want that, we have to look at why are they underachieving. The other one is praise the process over the results. So a lot of times we look at kids and we see this end result. And I'll give an example. We build Rube Goldbergs, and in my class. And what I see is I see some of my gifted kids build these profound, amazing Rube Goldbergs that never produce their final result. However, all the transitions are absolutely so well thought out, so, just beyond my other classes. And so the thing is that if I just praise the final result, what I'm telling them is that if you don't get it right, it's not good enough. When in actuality, their end result could be super simple. It's not about the result, it's about that process. And so you want to praise that process when you look at it and say, you know what, it's okay that you didn't get this exactly. Look at this note that you've been trying to hit, that you finally hit today. Or look at this, you got this 3-pointer. I get that you messed up. So just whatever it is, you want to praise that process. So I was able to look at these kids and say, this right here is so cool how you thought about this and how you, and they're like, but it didn't do this in the end. And I'm like, but I don't care. Because the other thing is, when we talk as science, it's so, I tell my kids, I'm like, science is all about failure. Like all these successes that didn't come until after thousands of failures. These medications that now work, how many failures happened to get to that point? And so that process is what matters. And so we want to celebrate the learning. The other thing is that we want to avoid words like smart and talented. Because if I say to you, oh my goodness, you are so smart, you are so talented, I have now placed a label that you have to measure up to. And the moment you don't measure up to that label, you're a failure. That's how you feel it. So we want to think of other ways to think about it. And I like how you process that. Tell me how you came up with that idea. Or I like how you were strategic with this. So there are ways that we can praise those things without placing a label, because what happens is when I say you're so smart, now what I've actually done is I have put this here, and now this kid is actually afraid to challenge themselves. Because if they challenge themselves and they can't reach this, they have failed in their eyes. So we just want to be careful with how we say those things. All right. And then we also want to teach them that failure is not a bad word. And that kind of piggybacks on the last one. And we want them to take those opportunities, to take those risks. And we want to model recovering from failure. When we make a mistake in front of them, instead of being, oh, I'm having a bad day, it's fine to say, you know what, I messed up. Let me try that again. And I look at my kids a lot of times, all of my kids, the first test I give, there's a lot of kids that don't pass it. Because now all of a sudden, they're at a different level, they're doing a different type of science, they're looking at a different type of test, and they don't do well. And so we look around, I said, everybody look around the room. Is anyone not breathing now? You're all good, you're all functioning. And it is okay to not do well sometimes, especially if you have done your best. And you know what? Maybe you didn't do your best, but you failed at something. So now let's figure out how do we regroup, and how do we move on, and how do we become successful? Because we place this word and such power in this word of, and I don't veer from that word. If a kid doesn't do well and they say I failed, I don't go, oh no, you didn't fail. Yeah, you failed, but that is not an end all be all. It's okay to, and I don't obviously you don't do it in an aggressive way, but don't make that word a bad word. Yeah, you failed this time, but guess what? What are we going to learn from it? Let's pick up the pieces and let's move on from that. So we want to push them out of that comfort zone so they're not scared to take a risk, so they're not scared of failure. And if you have, when kids are in that situation, if you have a situation that you can share with them that says, here, let me tell you a time where I failed, and this is what I did to recover, and this is how I did it. So, and let them see that you are not this invincible person, that you have also failed, especially if they hold you in a high regard for, like if you're coaching and they look at you a certain way, it's okay to say, listen, let me tell you, there was this championship game, and I had to, whatever it was, and so, but you can share that with them, and they can see that it is human to fail, and that is okay. And a lot of kids have never, ever had to work to succeed, ever. They've never been challenged. And if you're the first person that has ever challenged them, then you might be the first person they failed under. And so that's the other thing, is to realize that they may not know what that feels like. We see kids all the time that fail a test, that failed whatever it is. But we don't realize that that kid literally may never have failed at something. Or maybe when they did fail, they got upset and a teacher it's okay, just let's redo it right now. So a lot of times they might have been coached through that in a way that maybe actually developed some negative coping mechanisms versus allowing them to just sit in that for a moment, absorb it, and then figure out how to regroup and move on. So we have to coach them through that. All right, we want to develop mutually respectful relationships, and we do that a lot, but sometimes you don't realize the value of that. They do experience asynchronous development, and what that means is they are so far sometimes beyond their peers in certain ways that they don't match up. They may have a hard time making friendships, or they may feel that kids look at them a different way, and sometimes kids do look at them a different way. If you're a gifted kid and you didn't pass a test, all of a sudden your gifted peers may be making fun of you because you didn't pass a test, or maybe whatever. And so studies show, and I thought this was very, very interesting, studies have shown that gifted students often consider social support from their teachers to be more important than support from their peers. And I found that a very profound statement, that our relationships that we're building, that we just kind of do day to day, we don't actually realize how much value there is in that, because keep in mind, you've got a kid who sometimes they're more immature than their age, but sometimes they're more mature than their age, and they don't connect at the same, even with their gifted peers. And so that relationship with you and pleasing you, they place such value on that. And so when we build those relationships and they're saying to us, man, I failed my science test today, like it was awful. And they're, instead of like, you'll get it next time, hear them and absorb that and hear what they're coming to you because they're valuing your emotional support in that time. It's not just them. They could have said that to their peers or to their parents, but they're choosing strategically who they're sharing that information with. And so don't forget that and just, support them through that. And then through that, the other thing we want to do is we want to model how to show respect for themselves. So they have developed this level sometimes where they speak to an adult, sometimes in a very adult way. A lot of times they'll gravitate towards the adults. It's just where they feel more comfortable. And so when they're self-deprecating in that moment, understand that that's what their inner dialogue is. And so we have to model for them not just how to respect other adults, because sometimes they don't struggle with that. They don't know how to respect themselves. And so we can put that into perspective and explain to them, hey, you know what? Don't beat yourself up. Like, it's fine. Let's look at what can we look at, and so just model that for them. Listen intentionally with an open mind. And so gifted kids struggle sometimes because they need to vent, and they may not feel comfortable doing that at home, especially if they have a peer that is not gifted, that has struggled academically. So when they go home and say, man, I didn't do well on my test, I'm an 85. And they got a kid at home, a sibling, for example, who an 85 would be like amazing. They, all of a sudden, they get, well, you're fine, you did great, that's still a good grade. They sometimes don't vent toward their peers because they have a fear of judgment, or because they don't want to feel like they're being braggy. But they are like they're elitist, but they still, that to them is a failure. For some kids, an 85 is a failure, and we don't want to minimize that. So listen with an open mind and listen actively, like ask follow-up questions. Ask follow-up questions later. If they've shared something with you, okay, yeah, man, I didn't pass this test and I got to reassess. When you see them later, hey, did you reassess on that test? How'd you do? Okay, let them know that you actually care. And be authentic. We want to make sure that we're developing, and I know that we put so much into our kids, and we are so, sometimes we give so much, but understand that when they're sharing with you, they're placing value on this conversation. And so we want to try to be authentic with our reactions with them. And then our last one is increasing the rigor. Understand that a lack of challenge can actually cause them to be very frustrated. And can cause them to have negative thoughts because they're bored. I know that I have my own children at one point. I feel like I'm being punished for being smart because I don't get to learn. So every student, every person should have the ability, the right to learn something new every day. And so if we don't offer them a challenge, that's not fair to them. And so research shows significant evidence that acceleration is necessary for their social and emotional well-being. Keep in mind, sometimes they shut down at first, but once you give them acceleration and you explain to them that, or not even explain, but when they understand that this is exciting. This is exciting to learn something new. This is exciting to push myself, but it's almost like any other exercise. I cannot go up here and deadlift 300 pounds if I haven't worked out and developed the muscles to get there. And I may never be able to do that, but I can't do that if I haven't built up the stamina. They're gonna have to build up the stamina for that challenge. So we have to look at them and say, you know what? Let's try this. And we have to push them and step them up depending on what they've had in their past. Some of them may come to you and they've been challenged to a point where you are gonna have to like reach for the stars to figure out how can I challenge them. But some, they may need those baby steps, and we have to coach them through that because they haven't built that stamina up yet. And eventually what happens is we want them to crave that challenge versus running from it. And then I am going to read this last statement. Learning should target that area of development that is just out of reach of the child independently, but which they can master with assistance. So we want them to be reaching, but not so much that it feels like there's nothing that I can do. So there are things that you can do just day to day, things that you may already be doing, or little things that you can tweak. And so our hope is that we're meeting their needs so that they are excited to be at school, and so they're excited to learn. But do you have any questions? And the last slide is resources if you're interested in any of the resources that I have linked in here. And everything in here is not my opinion. These are all based on research. And so, you know, but you can have follow up and read there. But is there any questions about anything? So, well, thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it.